The evening had that specific kind of beauty you can't quite put into words, the kind that hurts just a little. It was late October in the Oregon hills, a time when the world seems to be holding its breath before the long exhale of winter. The air was cool but gentle, carrying the faint, sweet smell of wood smoke from a chimney somewhere down the valley. This had always been Elena's favorite time of year. She loved the way the orange and gold leaves crunched under her boots, sounding like dry paper. She loved the way the dusky sky turned soft shades of bruised violet and pale pink, reflecting off the wet pavement of the driveway. It made her feel peaceful, even if her life wasn't as peaceful as the world outside. Elena was 54 now. When she looked in the mirror in the hallway, the antique one with the clouded glass, she saw a woman with streaks of silver woven through her chestnut hair. She saw laugh lines around her eyes, little maps that told the story of years both kind and unkind. Life had taught her a very specific skill, how to keep her emotions tucked away in boxes, stored on high shelves where no one could easily reach them. She had been a wife once. She had been a mother always. And somewhere along the way, she had become a woman who stopped expecting surprises. Her house was large, perhaps too large for one person now. It was a Victorian craftsman, restored board by her late husband Robert 10 years ago. It groaned in the wind. It settled in the night. It was a house built for a family, but now it mostly held memories and the smell of lemon polish. Elena moved through the kitchen, the heart of the home. It was a Saturday. The calendar on the wall, with its pictures of French landscapes, marked the date in bold black ink. Today was the day. She was nervous. She told herself she shouldn't be. It was just dinner. It was just family. But the nerves were there, fluttering in her stomach like trapped moths. Her daughter Chloe was 28. Chloe was the bright spot in Elena's life, the sun breaking through the clouds. 2 years ago, Chloe had married a man named Daniel. And from the very first time Elena met him, she had understood exactly why Chloe fell for him. Daniel was warm. That was the first word that always came to mind. He was charming in an effortless way, the kind of man who always seemed to know the right thing to say to put you at ease. He had a way of looking at people, really looking at them, that made them feel noticed. He was the sort of man who could make strangers smile in a checkout line and make you believe every word he said, but it wasn't just his charm. It was the way he fit into spaces. He didn't dominate a room. He warmed it. Elena wiped the marble countertop for the third time. She checked the roast in the oven, the scent of rosemary and garlic wafting up in a savory cloud. She adjusted the placement of the forks on the dining table. Everything had to be perfect. It was a defense mechanism, she knew. If the house was perfect, if the food was perfect, then maybe she wouldn't feel so incredibly lonely when they left at the end of the night. She poured herself a small glass of red wine and stood by the kitchen window. Watching the headlights of cars winding up the hill road. She thought about Robert. He had been gone for 6 years now. A heart attack, sudden and rude. He had left her with this house, a decent insurance policy, and a silence so loud it sometimes woke her up at night. She missed him, of course, but lately the missing had changed texture. It wasn't a sharp pain anymore. It was just a dull ache, like an old injury that flares up when it rains. She also felt a quiet guilt. Because sometimes, just sometimes, she wondered if this was it. If this was the rest of her life. Gardening, reading, cleaning, and waiting for her daughter to visit. Was she just a spectator now? A supporting character in someone else's story? Headlights swept across the kitchen cabinets, cutting through her thoughts. They were here. Elena took a deep breath, smoothed the front of her dress, and put on her smile. The smile was her armor. It said, "I am fine. I am happy. I am Mom. She walked to the front door, unlocking it just as the bell rang. When the door swung open, The cold air rushed in, followed immediately by warmth. Mom. Chloe squealed, dropping her bag on the floor and launching herself into Elena's arms. Chloe smelled like rain and expensive vanilla perfume. She felt solid and real, and for a moment, Elena just held her, grounding herself in the reality of her daughter. Hi, sweetheart, Elena said, squeezing back. You're freezing. It's pouring out there now, Chloe laughed, pulling back. Her cheeks were flushed pink from the cold, her eyes bright. She looked happy, radiantly, annoyingly happy. Behind her, Daniel stepped in, closing the door against the wind. He was shaking raindrops off his coat. He looked up and his eyes found Elena's immediately. Hi, Elena, he said. His voice was a baritone that seemed to vibrate in the floorboards. He smiled, and the crinkles around his eyes deepened. He was handsome, undeniably so, with dark hair that was just messy enough to look stylish, and a jawline that could cut glass. But it was his eyes of shifting hazel that always caught her off guard. Hello, Daniel, she said, stepping back to let them fully into the foyer. Let me take your coats. I've got it, he said smoothly, slipping his coat off and then helping Chloe with hers. His movements were fluid, practiced. He hung them up on the rack with a familiarity that made him seem like he lived there. Something smells incredible, Daniel said, turning back to her. Rosemary? And garlic, Elena added. Potatoes are mashing as we speak. Go on in, pour yourselves a drink. I just need 10 minutes. Can I help? Chloe asked, already drifting toward the living room where the fire was crackling. No, absolutely not. You've been working all week. Sit, relax. As they moved into the living room, Elena retreated to the kitchen. She leaned against the counter for a second, closing her eyes. Why did she feel so flustered? It was Daniel. It was always Daniel. He was much, not in a bad way. He was polite, respectful, a good husband. But he had an intensity that unsettled her. Usually, sons-in-law were cordial. They talked about sports or home repairs. They tolerated the mother dash and dash law. Daniel didn't just tolerate her. He engaged with her. He remembered the books she was reading. He noticed when she changed her hair. It was flattering, yes, but it was also confusing. It made her aware of herself in a way she hadn't been in years. It made her aware of the gray in her hair and the fit of her dress. Stop it, she scolded herself. He's just a nice man. He's family. She busied herself with the mashed potatoes, adding an obscene amount of butter and cream. Comfort food. That's what they needed. From the living room, she could hear the low murmur of their voices. Chloe's bright laughter rang out, followed by Daniel's lower chuckle. They sounded like a unit, a team, a fortress of two. Elena felt a pang of envy so sharp it almost hurt. Not jealous of her daughter, she wanted Chloe to be happy more than anything, but jealous of the we. The simple, everyday miracle of having someone to end the day with. She shook it off, picked up the serving platter, and carried the roast into the dining room. Dinner is served, she called out, her voice cheerful and steady. The dining room was warm, lit by the soft glow of the chandelier and the candles Elena had placed on the table. The atmosphere was designed to be soothing, the heavy velvet curtains drawn against the night, the crystal glasses sparkling. They ate. They drank the Pinot Noir Daniel had brought. The conversation flowed easily at first, drifting from Chloe's work at the marketing firm to small-town gossip to memories from holidays past. So, Daniel said, cutting into a piece of beef, Chloe tells me you're thinking about redoing the garden in the spring. Elena looked up, surprised. She had mentioned that in passing to Chloe weeks ago. Oh, just a thought. The hydrangeas are getting old, and I was thinking of putting in a stone path. Maybe a bench. You should, Daniel said, nodding. You spend so much time out there. You deserve a place to sit and just ... Enjoy it. He looked at her then. It wasn't a casual glance. It was direct, focused. I think you'd make it beautiful, he added. Mom has a green thumb. Chloe chimed in, oblivious, pouring herself more water. Unlike me, I kill succulents. They all laughed, but Elena felt a flush rise up her neck. Daniel hadn't looked away when Chloe spoke. He had held Elena's gaze for a second longer than necessary. It wasn't enough to be obvious to anyone else. But Elena felt it. It was a quiet awareness, like the hum of a refrigerator, a sound you don't notice until you focus on it. And then you realize it's been playing in the background the whole time, throughout the meal. She started noticing the pattern. He would listen to Chloe, smile at her, hold her hand on the table. He was the perfect husband. But then in the lulls, his eyes would flicker across the table. He tracked Elena's movements. When she reached for the salt, his eyes followed her hand. When she laughed at a joke, he watched her mouth. It made her feel exposed. It made her feel electrified. Halfway through the apple pie, Elena's grandmother's recipe. Chloe's phone buzzed loudly against the wood of the table. Chloe groaned, looking at the screen. I am so sorry. It's the office. We have that lunch on Monday, and Sarah is panicking. Take it, Daniel said gently. We're not going anywhere. I'll be 5 minutes. I'm so sorry, Mom. Go. Elena waved her off. Chloe hurried out of the room, her voice shifting into her professional tone as she answered the call in the hallway. The silence that descended on the dining room was sudden. The candles flickered. The fire in the other room popped out. Elena stood up abruptly. I'll get the coffee started. She grabbed a stack of dessert plates, her hands trembling slightly. She needed to move. She needed to be in the kitchen, under the bright overhead lights. Away from the intimacy of the candlelight. She walked into the kitchen, setting the plates down on the counter with a clatter that was louder than she intended. She turned on the tap, letting the water run, staring out the window at the darkness. She sensed him before she heard him. The air in the kitchen shifted. It felt heavier, charged. Elena turned off the tap and dried her hands on a towel. She turned around, meaning to ask him if he wanted cream or sugar. Daniel was standing right there. He wasn't across the room. He was standing in the center of the kitchen, leaning against the island, watching her. He had followed her in so quietly she hadn't heard his footsteps. Can I help with anything? He asked. No, Elena said, breathless. No, I've got it. Just making coffee. You outdid yourself tonight, Elena, he said. He took a step closer. Everything was perfect. Thank you. I enjoy cooking for you too. For us too, he repeated. He tilted his head slightly. You know, you're always taking care of everyone else. The house, the garden, Chloe. That's what mothers do, Daniel, is it? He moved again. He was now inside her personal space, not touching her, but close enough that she could smell the wine on his breath, mixed with that cedar cologne. I think it's just who you are. You have this ... capacity, this depth. Elena gripped the edge of the counter behind her. The marble was cold against her palms. Daniel ... You look beautiful tonight, Elena. The words hung in the air. They were in the dining room was a carefully constructed stage for family bliss. Elena had lit the tall, tapered candles, and their golden flames danced in the reflection of the window panes, pushing back the dark, rainy night outside. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn, creating a cocoon of warmth and light. It felt safe in here, or at least it was supposed to. They ate. They drank the Pinot Noir Daniel had brought, a dark, rich vintage that tasted of cherries and oak. The conversation flowed easily at first, a comfortable river of shared history and updates. They talked about Chloe's work at the marketing firm, the stress of the upcoming holiday campaigns, the incompetence of her new assistant, Daniel listened intently, his hand resting casually on the tablecloth near Chloe's. He was an architect, a man who built things for a living, and Elena often thought he approached conversations the same way, testing the structural integrity, finding the load-bearing walls. So, Daniel said, cutting into a piece of beef with precise, easy movements. Chloe tells me you're thinking about redoing the garden in the spring. A complete overhaul? Elena looked up, surprised. She had mentioned that in passing to Chloe weeks ago, a fleeting thought during a phone call while she was weeding the hydrangeas. Oh, just a thought, Elena said, taking a sip of her wine to cover her hesitation. The hydrangeas are getting old, leggy. I was thinking of putting in a stone path, maybe a bench under the willow tree, somewhere to read. You should, Daniel said, nodding. He set his fork down and looked at her. You spend so much time out there. You deserve a place to sit and just ... Enjoy the things you've grown. He looked at her then. It wasn't a casual glance, the kind you give someone when you're just being polite. It was direct, focused. It felt like he was stripping away the layers of mother-in-law and widow and seeing the person underneath. I think you'd make it beautiful, he added, his voice dropping just a fraction. You have an eye for it, for making things bloom. Mom has a green thumb, Chloe chimed in, oblivious, pouring herself more water. Unlike me, I kill succulents. Remember that cactus you gave me, Daniel? Dead in a week. They all laughed, the sound bouncing off the high ceilings. But Elena felt a flush rise up her neck that had nothing to do with the wine. Daniel hadn't looked away when Chloe spoke. He had held Elena's gaze for a second longer than necessary, a secret suspended in the air between them. It wasn't enough to be obvious to anyone else. If Chloe had looked up, she would have seen her husband smiling at her mother, wholesome, kind, but Elena felt the weight of it. It was a quiet awareness, like the hum of a high-tension wire, a sound you don't notice until you focus on it. And then you realize it's been playing in the background the whole time, vibrating in your teeth. Throughout the meal, she started noticing the pattern. It became impossible to ignore. He would listen to Chloe, smile at her, hold her hand on the table. He was the perfect husband. But then, in the lulls and the spaces between breaths, his eyes would flicker across the table. He tracked Elena's movements. When she reached for the salt, his eyes followed the line of her wrist. When she laughed at a joke, he watched the corner of her mouth. When she smoothed her napkin on her lap, his gaze dropped to her hands. It made her feel exposed. It made her feel electrified. It was a feeling she hadn't experienced in years, the feeling of being the center of gravity in a room. Halfway through the apple pie Elena's grandmother's recipe, warm and dusted with cinnamon, Chloe's phone buzzed loudly against the wood of the table. The sound was jarring, shattering the mood. Chloe groaned, looking at the screen. I am so sorry. It's the office. We have that launch on Monday and Sarah is panicking. If I don't take this, she's going to call 3 more times. Take it, Daniel said gently. We're not going anywhere. I'll be 5 minutes. I'm so sorry, Mom. I promise, no work talk after this. Go. Elena waved her off, forcing a smile. Tell Sarah to breathe. Chloe hurried out of the room, her heels clicking on the hardwood, her voice shifting into her professional tone as she answered the call in the hallway. Sarah, yes, I'm here. What happened? The silence that descended on the dining room was sudden and absolute. The candles flickered, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The fire in the other room popped, a sharp sound in the quiet. Elena looked down at her plate. The crust of the pie suddenly looked dry. She could feel Daniel sitting across from her. She could feel his presence like a change in temperature. She knew without looking that he wasn't eating. She knew he was watching her. She stood up abruptly, the legs of her chair scraping against the floor. "I'll get the coffee started." She grabbed a stack of dessert plates, her hands trembling slightly. She needed to move. She needed to be in the kitchen, under the bright, clinical overhead lights, away from the intimacy of the candlelight. "Away from him, I can help," Daniel said, starting to rise. "No," Elena said, too quickly. "No, sit. Finish your wine." She turned and walked briskly into the kitchen, the swinging door pushing shut behind her. With a soft whoosh dot, she set the plates down on the counter with a clatter that was louder than she intended. She gripped the edge of the sink, staring out the window into the darkness of the backyard. Her reflection stared back pale, wide-eyed. "Pull yourself together," she told herself. "You are imagining things. He is just a friendly man. You are just a lonely woman." She turned on the tap, letting the water run cold, needing the noise to fill the empty space in her head. She sensed him before she heard him. The air in the kitchen shifted. It felt heavier, charged with static. The fine hairs on her arms stood up. Elena turned off the tap and dried her hands on a towel, moving slowly. She turned around, meaning to ask him if he wanted cream or sugar to keep things normal, to keep things safe. Daniel was standing right there. He wasn't across the room by the doorway. He was standing in the center of the kitchen, leaning against the island, watching her. He had followed her in, so quietly she hadn't heard his footsteps. "Can I help with anything?" he asked. His voice was low, stripped of the jovial tone he used with Chloe. "No," Elena said, breathless. She wiped a non-existent spot on the counter. "No, I've got it. Just making coffee. A mess. Did you want tea?" "Coffee is fine," he said. He didn't move. He just watched her hands. "You outdid yourself tonight, Elena," he said, taking a step closer. "The roast, the pie. Everything was perfect. Thank you. I enjoy cooking for you too." "For us too," he repeated. He tilted his head slightly, studying her face. "You know, you're always taking care of everyone else. The house, the garden, Chloe. Robert's legacy." The mention of her husband made her flinch. "That's what mothers do, Daniel. That's what wives do, is it?" He moved again. He was now inside her personal space, not touching her, but close enough that she could smell the wine on his breath, mixed with that cedar cologne and the scent of rain on wool. "I think it's just who you are. You have this capacity, this depth. Most people are surface level, Elena. You go all the way down." Elena gripped the edge of the counter behind her. The marble was cold against her palms, grounding her. "Daniel, USALULD in single quotes T. You look beautiful tonight, Elena." The words hung in the air, suspended like smoke. They weren't spoken loudly. He said them quietly, almost like a secret he had been holding in his mouth all evening. She froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird, frantic and wild. This was wrong. This was a line. A son-in-law tells his mother-in-law she looks nice. He tells her she looks well. He does not tell her she looks beautiful, with a voice that drops into a lower register, with eyes that are scanning her face like a starving man looking at a feast. "Thank you," she managed to whisper. Her voice sounded foreign to her own ears, thin and reedy. He didn't back away. He looked at her streaks of gray hair, her eyes, her lips. The silence stretched, thick and elastic. The kitchen, usually her sanctuary, felt small, suffocating as she leaned forward 3 inches, or if he did ... the thought terrified her. It was a cliff edge, crumbling under her feet. But God help her, it also sent a jolt of heat straight to her stomach, a feeling of aliveness she hadn't felt in a decade. She started, but she didn't know what to say. "Stop looking at me like that?" Or "Don't stop." From the hallway, the sound of footsteps clicked on the hardwood. Okay, crisis averted. Chloe's voice rang out, getting closer. I swear, Sarah would lose her head if it wasn't attached. Danielle stepped back. It was a smooth, seamless motion, practiced and terrifyingly easy. By the time Chloe pushed through the swinging door, Daniel was leaning casually against the fridge, arms crossed, looking completely benign. A picture of innocence. Sarah just lost the file, but I found it on the cloud, Chloe said, rolling her eyes, walking over to hug Daniel's side. She wrapped her arm around his waist, resting her head on his shoulder. Daniel looked down at his wife and smiled. You're the savior of the office, babe? He kissed Chloe's temple. It was a tender, affectionate gesture. Elena watched them, her heart still racing so fast she felt dizzy. She felt like she was watching a play where the actors had suddenly switched scripts. She turned back to the coffee machine, her hands shaking as she reached for the mugs. The ceramic clinked together, a betrayal of her nerves. She had imagined it. She had to have imagined it. He was just being nice. He was a charismatic man who made people feel special. She was a lonely widow reading too much into a compliment because she was starved for affection. But as she poured the dark, steaming liquid into the cups, she could feel his eyes on her back again. A steady, heavy weight, a heat that burned through her dress. She knew the truth. Something had shifted in this kitchen. A door that should have been locked and bolted had just been cracked open, just a sliver. And through that crack, a cold, thrilling draft was blowing in. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of polite conversation that felt fake to Elena's ears. They drank the coffee. They ate the last of the pie. They put on their coats. Elena stood by the open front door as they walked to their car. The rain had stopped, leaving the world glistening and black. The smell of wet asphalt and damp earth filled the air. Thanks, Mom, Chloe called out, waving before ducking into the passenger seat. Let's do lunch next week. Yes, let's. Elena called back, her voice bright and brittle. Daniel walked around to the driver's side. He opened the door, paused, and looked back over the roof of the car. The interior light of the car illuminated his face for a brief second. He caught Elena's gaze. He held it for 1 second, 2 seconds. His expression was unreadable in the shadows, but the intensity was there. It was a look that said, I know you felt it too. Then he got in, the engine roared to life, and they were gone. The red taillights disappeared down the winding driveway, swallowed by the mist. Elena closed the door and locked it. She threw the deadbolt. She leaned her forehead against the cool wood. The house was silent again, but it didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt like the quiet before an explosion. She walked back to the kitchen to clean up. She washed the plates. She dried the wine glasses. But when she picked up the glass Daniel had used, she hesitated. She held it for a moment, staring at the faint smudge of his lip print on the rim. She washed it quickly, scrubbing hard with the sponge, the hot water scalding her hands, as if she could scrub away the memory of his voice saying, You look beautiful. She turned off the lights and went upstairs to bed. She lay under the heavy quilt, listening to the wind rattle the window frames. But sleep didn't come. The warmth of his gaze followed her into the dark, curling around her like smoke, whispering questions she was too afraid to answer.